Thank you, Mia. And Mia, before you leave the stage and everyone involved, I used to run conferences for a living. So thank you to Mia and the committee and the organizers and the staff of the hotel and the AV staff. Let's give them a round of applause. They're often forgot about. I'm taller than you, Mia. I apologize. Yeah, Mark gives his regards. He's actually off the southeast coast of Japan right now, steaming back on a marine conservation ship, so he won't be here. So on his behalf, I'm helping present the reef resilience capacity building with the tourism industry. I couldn't have said it better. Selena, I think you're in the room here somewhere. You mentioned earlier that implementation is difficult and expensive, and we need to act at pace. So thank you for saying that this morning. We are going to have scaling challenges as it comes to reef restoration, adaptation program implementation, and we need to figure out how we're going to scale, like we've heard today in this room, and I'm sure in other rooms, from these micro or site scale projects into these regional scale projects. There's a bottleneck for both current and emerging practices for the intervention is the on-water infrastructure. And appropriately skilled human people, yes, human resources. We need to develop these approaches that are more labor and infrastructure efficient, and we've heard a lot about that today as well. It's great to have all these points already so well addressed, and we need to have the ability to mobilize the non-research provider labor and resources. My job at Ames and many of the partners in the RRAP program, our job isn't actually the implementation of the R&D, it's the R&D itself and helping translate all of those R&D findings into industry. So we have identified, and I'm sure many of you have identified, the tourism operator community as the key reef stewards, or the key stewards of the reef. They have this knowledgeable source of local reefs and resources available. They're out there oftentimes every day, if not multiple times a day. They are beneficiaries of the reef resilience efforts that many of us are conducting R&D on. They are the owners and operators of marine assets that they already own and operate every day. They have the ability to be the essential local businesses that have the human people, like I mentioned earlier, all ready for us to utilize. And in some cases, like we've heard in some of the talks, these tourism operators are actually already participating in reef restoration projects. And actually, someone who was in this room earlier said that they couldn't put all of the logos on the page because there were just too many, and that was a great problem to have. And so some of the challenges, and I think if I click again, yeah, some of the challenges that these tourism operators have are going to be aligning their production and operation deployments with their existing tourism operations already. So here we have a video from one of our partners in the Whitsundays taking video of our Boats for Corals methodology that we'll get into later in this presentation. But this is them out on site in the Whitsundays along with the two other operators in the background there during the daytime when they would normally be operating their own tourism excursions. And so we want to make sure that as we scale and as we utilize these tourism operators that are already out there, that we're not interfering and interrupting their day-to-day programs. And plus, it's just a beautiful video. I had the opportunity, along with Deb, who's in the room, who presented with me earlier, to be out there, and it was a beautiful location. So like I mentioned earlier, the tourism operators, they actually already have these on-water assets. And the reef interventions, they need these basically deployable and redeployable assets on the water because oftentimes we don't have the ability to leave them out on site. We need to be able to have them be efficient with regards to their operational requirements, but still have the boats and crews available for our methods and for their day-to-day employment. So ultimately, the tourism operators, which are the sector with the largest capacity of commercial boats on the reef, plus the tourism operators as the essential reef stewards, they are our ability to deliver, a high potential to deliver the reef restoration interventions that we have. However, the commercial operations need to be optimized around delivering the particular services to customers. So here in the bottom left, we conveniently have a zigzag boat doing what it does best, delivering the tourists to the reef to go see the beautiful coral and the door closing reef options that they have available to them. So therefore, our key challenge is how best to integrate the requirements for delivering the reef interventions with the existing and planned operations. And we need to consider the revenue opportunities, the safety, the permits, the vessel capabilities. And as we scale this methodology not only to the Whitsundays like we've already done, but we implement this methodology into other locations, these considerations, not only as a T2D team, but an RRAP and other implementers around not only Great Barrier Reef, but elsewhere in the world, need to take all these points into consideration. It's, as we've heard, I'm sure in other rooms as well as here, we need to make sure that the methods that we're expanding and having the reef tourism industry lead are simple enough for them to be able to carry out, because more and more I think we're trying to deliver methodologies that are potentially overcomplicated, and so we need to make sure that the interventions are becoming simple enough and operational enough to be able to be implemented. So some of the challenges that we've identified with the tourism operators, unfortunately, is their workforce can be, let's say, transient. They might not have the same staff from year to year. They're balancing their seasonal tourism workload with our seasonal intervention workload. We were there in November and December this past year in the Whitsundays, and it was great, but it was also kind of the start of spring, and it might interfere with school holidays, maybe in Queensland or elsewhere. And so we need to make sure that what we are asking of the tourism operators as we go ahead and move forward and work with them, they're able to take on board. Additionally, I have coworkers who are, and many of us are interested in the governance and the funding arrangements for these collaborative efforts. At the moment, we have the ability to assist in the funding of these tourism operators as they help us and we help them scale these efforts. But we need to make sure that there is a funding arrangement in place for them into the future. Also, we need to make sure, like I'll say in a separate slide later on, that the scientists are there initially to help guide the science, but we're not always there moving forward. The R&D teams and the scientists who are kind of assisting with all this are on tap and not on top. So the intervention sites are oftentimes the easiest locations for the tourism operators to go to. They might be near their port or nearby their home location. In some cases, the reason that they're there is because it's actually an economically important reef or close by to a port, as we see in the Whitsundays. A lot of these photos we'll talk about later as well, but this just happens to also be the boats for corals and the RRAP. One of the good things that we saw in this case study that we'll acknowledge here shortly with Boats for Corals is that we have multiple operators working collectively together. A lot of these photos that we've chosen for this presentation are not only traditional owners working with the reef tourism industry, but these are the tourism industry working with other tourism industry operators. They're coming together to collectively have a beneficial impact on the Great Barrier Reef. In the bottom right, we have two tourism operators, we have an employee of AIMS, and we have some of the local TOs as well. We're capacity building, but we're also building confidence. It was kind of amazing to see. I took this top right photo. This is 4 tourism industry boats from 3 different companies all working together on the Boats for Corals program. And in the bottom right, we have one of our IP team, our Indigenous Partnership team, members, Jordan, who was here with us yesterday, leading kind of the evening safety talk before we go out and utilize the industry boats and the traditional owner boats to capture the coral slick. And as the interventions develop, we need to go ahead and understand that the deployment needs to be led by organizations other than these research providers. We're there, in this case, as the kind of the final year to hand off the program. And in many times we have seen now, I think on this top right photo especially, all 3 of those tourism operators have been involved now for more than 3 of the 5 years. These tourism operators, they're not competing with each other. This is really great to see. I took all of these photos, and it was actually amazing just to see everyone helping out with each other. In the bottom left, we're actually doing another safety induction once we're on site already. I happen to be standing on, I believe, which Zigzag, and next to us we have an ocean rafting boat. But we have, I think, what was 9 different organizations represented on this trip, all coming together to talk about the day's mission. In the bottom right, we actually have members of 2 of those tourism operators coming together to pour that collected coral spawn into the nets. And then on the top right, I believe we're on board Zigzag, and we're actually taking the collected coral spawn onto Zigzag, rather, to bring together. This is the photo of all of us together, apart from myself, oftentimes being the only normally hided person in the group. I'm tasked with raising my arms up high and taking a photo. But it was great to see everyone come together. I do see some bunny ears in that photo now that I look more closely. And here's another photo of all of us combining together to, in this case, we're always listening to Mark, who unfortunately isn't here, or Jordan, so they caught the stage here. So I'll go into this Boats for Corals case study that I've been talking about, and I normally like to pace, but I apologize. I'm going to look over to my right shoulder now. So this commenced as a pilot program in 2020, and this was actually outside of RRAP. It's currently funded through June 2025. And with the help of SCU, AIMS and SCU oversee the operations, and we hold all of the relevant approvals and conduct the research alongside the restoration activities. And so I believe up until this past year, the SCU representatives had to do more R&D, and the AIMS representatives were in the Whitsundays continuing to assist the tourism operators and the traditional owners. The restoration activities are based off the larval movements developed by RRAP, and that R&D, like I just mentioned, with CSIRO and SCU, will be continuing hopefully into the future as well, and we'll take their findings and implement them into the pilot scale deployments. And so this past year when we were in the Whitsundays, this was funded through the GBRF Reef Island Initiative. Like I said, it was AIMS-led. In the bottom left, we have the 5 anchor points, so where we initially anchored the pools, and we were able to deploy into those green targeted sites with the help of, I believe, 4 different industries, 2 different traditional owner groups, and I believe we had some visiting tourism operators from up in the Cairns region as well. But you've seen this photo a couple times now that was taken by one of the tourism operators with their drone. We have all of us here actually on the pool doing a kind of a targeted deployment of that coral spawn onto a reef that was kind of identified to us as needing restoration. So if you're not familiar, I don't think it's been covered, at least in this room yet, of the kind of the moving corals or the larval slick capture and release. We go ahead and we collect the naturally occurring coral spawn at night from the ocean surface. I'm just going to make sure that everyone realizes that we're doing this often from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. at night. And so many of the tourism operator staff and volunteers who were with us, they had started, I believe, at 5 a.m., 6 a.m. that same day. They got off of their day boat trip. They quickly, had a drink, and then they were with us at that photo that you saw with Jordan and Mark giving the safety induction. And they're out there. They were actually more excited than I was. And normally I'm jumping up and down saying, "Boats for corals," just to get morale up. But they were there with us from all the way until 2 or 3 in the morning. So we're out there collecting that naturally occurring coral spawn. We go ahead and we relocate that coral spawn to the pools that you've seen in the previous photos. Here we have a photo that Chris Staropoulos from CSIRO took in the past of his wild collected spawn. And we can go ahead and let that coral spawn develop over time, and then we can release those coral spawn once they developed into the locations that have already been identified. And this goes ahead and increases the chance of that coral larvae surviving to adulthood. So in this past year, we had the participants, like I mentioned earlier, we have Zigzag. You might have seen them in the red shirts throughout the presentation. We had but Zigzag in the blue shirts in the previous presentation. I apologize. The Red Cat Adventure in the red shirts. The ocean rafting in the yellow shirts. You see Nick here, who's one of our RRAP partners from QUT, wearing the very brightly colored orange neck buff as part of our PPE, branded PPE that I put together for everyone, but that says Boats for Corals and has all the partners on it, as well as we had members from various NGOs, traditional owner groups, and we had some visiting tourism operators from other regions. It was also great to see, like I just mentioned, the traditional owners. And earlier today, I was reminded that many times these families and these individuals haven't actually been on their own country. And Bob's nodding, thank you. Is bringing them back to country and bringing them back to the actual, their sea country was quite impactful. And so we had, I think this is an inclusive photo of all the traditional owners and the T2D team on the bottom right. I think, Deb, you're in there as well, yep. And it brought them back to country, and they were there, not only just watching us, but I took this photo in the top right, and those gentlemen and Mark and myself, we were the ones hauling the chains and the ropes and tying the knots, and they learned so much from us. And actually, we went home at the end of the day, and we were supposed to have a day off, and I was there with them the next day on that day off, actually teaching them more knots, because they wanted to actually learn and ingest all of that knowledge from everyone. And that was great to see. And so they were involved in every part of the way, including the bottom and left on zigzag, actually. Convenient photo. We'll put that there. Like I mentioned earlier, we're at the point now with the Whitsundays, and hopefully into the future in other locations, that this is going to be a kind of a science on tap and not on top. We're always going to need this ongoing role for scientific inputs. Many of the interventions will require, scientific input and guidance along the way, whether that's from AIMS or from some sort of managing authority from the RRAP interventions into the future. And that the research is also required, is going to be continued. And so as those outputs from the future R&D are put out, we can go ahead and implement those. And with that, I will pass it over to Nicole from Zigzag to finish the presentation.
Thank you, Kevin. Hi, I'm Nicole. Thank you for having me. It's a great honour to be speaking here today. It's not something that I envisioned doing a few years ago. I'm the owner and operator of Zigzag Whitsundays. Sorry, thank you. And that is a marine tourism company in the Whitsundays, funnily enough. I also work in a number of other businesses as a manager and director in a Coral Sea Technology, a technology company, an AV company. I'm involved in seagrass restoration with CKU and Great Barrier Reef Foundation. And I'm currently studying as well, so I've got a few things on my plate. I've been working in marine tourism for almost 15 years now. I've worked across many businesses and tour types, from the overnight maxi market, large capacity reef experiences, 120-year-old tall ship, as well as small day tours. I've worked as a hostie, a deckhand, a skipper, a marine bio or reef educator, as well as in operations. I've had some amazing times working on the reef. But I've also been there for some of the lower times in this industry, such as when Cyclone Debbie ran through the Whitsundays and the multiple shutdowns that we saw through COVID. In 2017, my partner and I started Zigzag Whitsundays 5 days after Cyclone Debbie hit our area. It was definitely not the best time to be starting a new tourism business, but somehow we pulled it off. Now we run one boat. We take 30 guests a day snorkeling, on bushwalks and to Whitehaven Beach. We have 10 staff and we can take up to 10,000 passengers a year. One of the goals that I had when I started Zigzag was to provide a transformative experience rather than just a sightseeing tour. When people see the reef for the first time, it creates the perfect opportunity to foster a connection and care for the environment. People become more receptive to learning about the environment, its threats, and how it can impact them personally. And I believe that educating our passengers in that moment is one of our responsibilities as tour operators and as stewards of the reef. And that's one of the reasons that I get so excited about these cooperative projects. I first became involved in the Boats for Corals project in 2022. Working alongside the other tourism operators and traditional owners and the researchers. We get contracted for 2 vessel days where we are involved in the setup and the larval deployment, as well as 2 night times for the spawn collection. Like Kevin said, I was one of those lucky people that got to work from 5 in the morning until I think it was 3 or 4 a.m. the next day, and then get back on the boat the next morning, which is obviously not great fatigue management. So 6 of our staff are keen to be involved in as much as possible, which is really encouraging, from the planning, the setup, spawn collection, larval release, and they even wanted to be involved in the pack down, which was nice of them. We're also involved in the Reef Authority's Tourism Reef Protection Initiative, where we perform reef health impact surveys across 5 reefs, as well as tourism weekly surveys at our stewardship site, and cots and drapeller culling. Some of our contracted days involve surveyor work during a regular tourist day, whilst others are dedicated survey days, and that allows us access to areas that we can't visit while we have passengers on board. There are many benefits to our involvement with these projects, and obviously there's the positive environmental impact and protecting the reef for future reef tourism to be an option. I've always tried to ensure that my crew are knowledgeable about the environment and confident to pass on that information to guests. When we're involved in these projects, we gain such a greater understanding of the ecology, the environmental threats and the potential solutions to these problems. It's so much more than my crew can learn by any formal training that we do or any of the information that I provide to them. The conversations and knowledge sharing that occurs is great not just for our understanding, but as an effective way to communicate new science and management strategies to the general public. Science communication is notoriously challenging, particularly to the general public, and when there's so much misinformation around. And tour guides are seen as a trusted source of information, so we can be an effective channel for this communication. The knowledge sharing goes both ways, as we're the ones on the reef every day, seeing the changes in real time and building in-depth local knowledge of our areas. And we can share this knowledge with researchers and people planning fieldwork so that we can save time and costs. A good example of this was the planning for the Boats for Corals sites, which involved staff from multiple companies, and we identified the areas which could not only benefit from restoration, but had a history of decent coral coverage and tourism use prior to cyclone damage, as well as meeting the logistical needs of the project. If we were to try and identify a site that met all those parameters by a group that didn't have this local knowledge, it would be very costly and time-consuming. So there are financial benefits for everyone involved. A lot of operators began their involvement with projects as a result of COVID, when they needed to find alternative revenue streams and ways to keep their staff employed. With minimal additional training, staff and vessels could be deployed in this different capacity. For a lot of crew, it's also great to be able to do something different. My crew love the days that are dedicated to projects. It's a chance to build on their connections with the environment and with each other without the demands of passengers, and this comes through when they then return to a regular passenger day. Becoming stewards of the reef rather than just users of the reef fosters that deeper connection and can increase our staff retention. When you feel like what you do matters, that you're having a positive impact on the world, that can have such a massive impact on your job satisfaction and therefore my staff retention. When we share the work that we do with our passengers, it enhances their experience. So they feel like they have a level of involvement and like they're having a positive impact just by choosing to travel with us. So whilst there are many benefits, like any project, there are going to be challenges to work through. Logistically, a lack of flexibility with timing and organisation can raise issues on both sides. Unfortunately, like Kevin mentioned, the Boats for Corals program, the spawning can occur at the start of our peak tourism season. So in years where there might be a split spawn, if we need to organise a second round of collections at the last minute, that might mean that our vessels are already fully booked, or the businesses may be unwilling to redirect staff and boats away from more lucrative activities. If we cancel our passengers, it can give us a bad reputation with customers as well as with travel agents, and those relationships are essential to us running our business. It also impacts all the companies and our vessel supply chain. Permits are a constant source of confusion, and that's before we even add in any of the research or intervention permits. In the Whitsundays, we have to comply with zoning regulations, commercial activity permits, marine parks permits, as well as the Whitsunday Plan of Management regulations. So adding anything in on top of that, it can get to be quite a lot. When you're working with multiple businesses across a single project, that can have its challenges despite our ability to cooperate really well and how much we enjoy working together. Choosing a leader for the project from one company over another could potentially damage relationships between not just the businesses, but also with the collaborators. Again, Kevin mentioned the transientness of the tourism industry. So knowledge loss is a big issue, particularly when the project's activities occur infrequently, or if a lot of time and effort has to go into the training to be involved in the projects. And at the end of the day, the tourism industry is a business. And whilst one of the benefits of these partnerships is that because we already have the infrastructure in place and we've had the desire to do so, it means that we've been subsidising the costs. As tourism returns to pre-COVID level and requirements for an alternative revenue stream are reduced, it may become less desirable to bear these costs despite the other benefits provided. Some businesses are able to run their projects alongside regular tours, and this is more applicable to the larger capacity tours which have the numbers to provide a range of options throughout the day. This is where permitting can get really confusing if your tourists are also going to be involved in the projects. Whereas other businesses have to run projects in place of their regular tours, as the requirements from the project could detract from our guests' experience. Now we need to make decisions on whether it's actually viable or practical to be involved. Insurance issues are also a huge problem for the tourism industry, with less insurers willing to cover us. And every year it's like playing Russian roulette of whether we can even continue to operate. We have seen a number of businesses shut down because they were unable to be insured. So if we want the tourism industry to be able to provide the infrastructure, the staff and subsidise costs, then we need to have drastic changes made to the government policies regarding insurance so that we can actually continue to have a tourism industry available for collaborations. So whilst flexibility and simplification of permits would be a great solution, I do understand that changes to that system is not a small undertaking and it's not going to be taken lightly. I think an intermediate solution would be better communication between managing agencies, crews on board, collaborators, so that everybody involved has a very clear understanding of what's allowed under different situations. Not being transparent with the true costs of involvement is probably a hole that we've dug for ourselves, where we've significantly subsidised costs because we have had the desire to achieve the outcomes of the projects, or we've been seeking ways to keep vessels running and crew employed during slow times. This can become less desirable as either revenue from tourism returns, or if the passenger numbers are remaining low, businesses may no longer have that financial capacity. When we consider all the costs that need to be included, you need to include additional crew for planning, or pack downs, administration tasks such as working and amending your SMSs and OHS policies, all the paperwork involved, rostering, and the potential for crews to end up working overtime in small businesses with limited crew availability. We also need to understand whether projects can be run alongside a regular tour or whether specific days need to be set aside and the financial implications of these differences. When it comes to leadership, having someone from outside the tourism industry can be really beneficial. We've been extremely fortunate to work with Reef catchments who have taken on a leadership role. They've gone from initiating contact with the different businesses that might be interested, arranging planning meetings, funding, all sorts of other things that you can ask Cass about. She's been very prominent in that in the Whitsundays. And that really simplifies our involvement, and it can avoid the chaos of having too many people trying to take charge. I believe it's also really important to have management involved, not just in organising or grant writing, but physically on board and hands-on. It's not just so that they can retain that knowledge of the processes in such a transient industry, but also so that they can connect with the projects and experience the full benefit of involvement. I think that's also going to be a good way to increase their support for future projects. Hopefully, I have managed to provide some insight into what these projects can mean for the tourism industry, and that while there are some challenges, they're all possible to work through, and that I believe these projects are extremely valuable as we move into the future. thank you for your time, and thank you to everyone that has been involved in these projects, that has included us, and also to the organisers of this event.
And Kevin, just a reminder to everyone for questions, if you can come down and use these microphones at the front so the online audience can hear the questions as well. So I'll open for questions. Anyone keen for a walk down to the front for questions? Russell, you were moving. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Phil Laycock, Cairns and Port Douglas Reef Hub. Great realistic presentation about the ins and outs of what these early stages of these partnership interventions look like. Just interested in your reference just then in your closing remarks about flexibility with permits. Now, is that flexibility within the process? Is it within the permit? Is it within the collaboration? Where is that flexibility needed? Is it in all areas there? Or is it more agility than flexibility?
Probably more agility. I think if we can have better understanding of what's happening with those permits, and if there is flexibility and who can actually handle the permits, as in whether they go to the researchers, whether they're going to the operator, whether they're going to the crew that are actually doing the work, who may be working between a number of different vessels. So there are so many different parameters that apply, which is why you need to possibly look at a situation approach.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation, Nicole. I was just interested how you're saying potentially once COVID finishes, if it ever does, that the tourism numbers will probably get back up there. So at some point, tourism operators will have to make a decision. Do we take a boatload of tourists or do we go and do the spawning stuff? Obviously, the tourists will probably win because that's, like you say, you're running a business. What capacity is there to bring other people in, like traditional owner groups, to build their capacity up to do that type of work within that region? And like it's only once a year, so obviously you're not going to be able to run a business for it, but that's something where I could see there could potentially bring up some of the local groups that are interested or that have been in the boats for corals and just say, well, how can we build their capacity, or is there just not enough boats? Like just say you had to go on a trip, can you bring another boat in to do the spawning stuff, or that's just not possible?
Yeah, engaging traditional owners to do this work is definitely possible, and I think that's one of the aims of the project, is to bring them on board and have them running projects. We can always bring on more vessels, but if it's just for 4 days a year, like the marina at the Whitsundays is pretty full, and there's only a few boats that aren't running. They're not running because they can't get insurance. So they're not going to be able to get insurance to do this kind of work either. They're also not going to have the crew available. We are just looking at a few days a year, it doesn't detract from what we're doing. We're definitely more than willing to be involved in that. I think I was referring more to long-term projects where you are taking the boat off the run for, say, 1 day a week or possibly a week at a time, that level of activity. And I think because they're trying to scale up all of these intervention works and there's more things in the planning, that's something that is going to be an issue in the future.
Thank you. Renata, thanks.
Thank you, Kevin and Nicole. That was really interesting. I think probably half the people here are scientists, so I'd like to hear a little bit more what you think is the ideal science on tap rather than on top, or scientists on tap rather than on top.
I think utilising the scientists in the future is going to be essential to improving the projects as we go. You know, we might come up with new ideas of how we want to do things. We're obviously going to need to run that by the scientists so that they can let us know if that's actually going to work from the science perspective or the biological perspective, whereas we might be able to tell you if it's possible to do logistically.
We probably have time for one more question if there's any, or thanks, Warren.
Just following up from Rena, it is clear when I see passionate tourist operator owners talk that you are not involved with this for the money, because doesn't make it any easier. So there is an inherent sort of interest in being involved, apart from for the scientists, apart from helping developing things and checking what you do. What information could make you and the people that think like you want to continue doing it? What kind of feedback from the scientists could help you maintain that sort of, you know, sacrifice or effort that is not compensated economically?
I don't think it's necessarily additional information that we need from the scientists. We already are engaging with this work from an altruistic point, but it does come down to that: is it financially viable? Companies like my own, where we do have that desire to be involved in conservation, reef protection, but there are also companies that are purely running it as a business, and so that is probably where the financial issues are going to arise. But I think that we already get such a lot of information from the scientists, and like I mentioned, it's one of the amazing things about being on board for these projects is seeing all of our crew learning so much and finding new areas that they then go and dive into, and I love seeing that, so I appreciate that from everyone involved.
Okay, please join me in saying thank you to Nicole and Kevin once more.